always visit the graveyard on Halloween night. I walk out of my house and set off down the sidewalk, a middle-aged hoodie in a sea of princesses and race car drivers. My yearly ritual is easily and often misunderstood. Yes, I know it is Halloween. Yes, I know the cemetery is technically closed after dark. Yes, I know there are dozens of teenagers doing exactly what I am doing right now for a cheap thrill. I couldn't care less. 7 years ago tonight, my son was struck and killed by a drunk driver while trick-or-treating. He was out with a friend and that friend's mother. My worthless ass was working late, and my ex-wife was just as out of the picture then as she is now. I always liked to be with my boy on the anniversary, down to the minute of his passing. Maybe because I feel obligated to be there for him in death when I wasn't in life. I don't know. I was never good with that deep emotional bullshit. I approached the cemetery slowly and quietly, careful to make sure that no other living souls are around. After confirming this fact, I hop swiftly over the 6-foot-tall gate and land with soft feet. My son's stone is in the back right corner, so I begin my trek clumsily, tiptoeing around death markers in the All Hallows darkness. I am halfway there when I hear a mausoleum door creak open. I turn directly to my left and make out the black silhouette of a woman dressed in a flowing gown, standing in the frame. She notices me. Her voice rides out slowly and warily on the late autumn breeze. Her words have a sort of uneven inflection, not unlike the intermittent sloshing of small waves into an otherwise silent beach. I don't even blink. Growing up in the inner city and serving time in the military, I had seen some shit, least of all a ghost. What are you doing here? Visiting my son. A brief pause. The wind intensifies momentarily, sending a few more orangey red leaves down below our feet. What are you doing here tonight? I think for a moment. I want to speak truthfully, but I am sure a spirit has better things to do than listen to an old man's sob story. I'm here to visit my son. I guess tonight is when I feel closest to him. The atmosphere lightens, as if I had just explained myself to an authority figure who suspected me of wrongdoing. The ghost sounds clearer, less weary. Ah, very good. Visiting family is important. I'm actually off to visit my son right now. With that, the woman takes off for the front of the cemetery in a floaty walk. I follow her as far as my night-adjusted eyes can track, but eventually her individual darkness fades away into the greater darkness of the night. Halloween, the one night of the year when the world of the living and the world of the dead are intertwined. I Bring My Daughter to the Graveyard by Psyopticnerve.
What does this one say?
Emma asked, pulling at my sleeve. I squinted down at the moss-covered lettering. I can't really tell, sweetie. This was her favorite thing to do, which might have alarmed me if she wasn't the sweetest kid ever. She would make her way through the rows of headstones, wondering about the people they belonged to, offering kind words or placing flowers in front of them. She especially liked talking to the children. Hearing her sing to them was beautiful in the most chilling way.
Papa, come see this,
she yelled, waving her hands. I trudged over to the collapsed headstone she was crouched beside.
This one is Rory's,
she said, quite upset. Rory was one of the first ones she remembered. We visited him every time we came.
Poor Rory.
I felt bad not knowing what to say to make her feel better. His stone had been in rough shape, and when it fell, it had broken into several pieces. Emma picked up a small piece of the slate, shaking her head. Don't worry. He's still going to be here when we come back, I told her. She took my hand, looking like she might cry. I did my best to get her mind on other things as we walked home. Eventually, I got her to crack a smile. At bedtime, I noticed something new on her nightstand, a tiny piece of slate. Emma, you shouldn't have taken this.
But why?
She cried. Sweetie, I know you think he's special, but he wouldn't want you to take this.
Yes, he would.
I thought for a moment. We'll take it back tomorrow. Although she wasn't satisfied, she stopped the meltdown she was building to. After I tucked her in, I told my wife about it. You're making her take it back? She asked, to my surprise. Simone, isn't it bad luck or something? You don't think that's creepy as hell? Well, yeah, but you know how she is. She's been talking to that kid for a while now. If he can hear her, he must know that she only has the best intentions. I had just started dozing off when I heard whispering. It was faint, but I was definitely hearing someone. Panicked, I bolted to Emma's room. Her door was wide open, her bed empty. Simone came out of our bedroom, looking at me with bleary eyes. Emma's missing, I screeched. Simone's face went white. She's left a note, she gasped. Sure enough, scribbled on a sticky note was her message. Simone held it up with shaking hands. Went with Rory. I barely had any breath left by the time I got to the cemetery gates. I tried to make out my daughter's figure in the darkness as I ran toward Rory's grave. I fell to my knees when I got close enough to see his plot. There was fresh dirt piled in front of Rory's collapsed headstone. The tiny piece of slate resting on top. The Gravedigger by the Prowler. To say that the life of the common citizen who called the streets of Liverpool home during the mid-19th century difficult would be an understatement. The lack of opportunities regarding earning a living, to the filth on the streets, the smell of freshly strewn chamber pots permeating the alleyways and main thoroughfares of the city almost made it difficult to breathe. While the noble classes wined and dined without a care, the ordinary commoner had to get creative to earn a shilling. While yes, there were citizens who enjoyed respectful occupations, such as the common shop owner, bakers, butchers, delivery men, and the like. Other less unfortunates had to get a little more creative. Some turned to thievery. Others provided enjoyment and companionship to a gentleman for the right price. And then there's the special individual who made their living by scouring the graveyards and cemeteries. There were two different types of grave robbers during the time. One that would dig up corpses and sell them to the universities and medical schools for anatomy and medical knowledge purposes. And then there were the ones that just dug up the freshly deceased to rob them of their valuables. One particular coffin disturber, a Mr. Reginald Wrigglesbottom, was making quite a name for himself in the hushed corners and dark alleyways of society. An orphan in his youth, he turned to petty crimes once he hit the streets when he became of age. After a year or two of pickpocketing and common thievery, he latched on to an older gentleman who taught him a trade, and after that he spent his nights toiling the graveyard soil for plunder and financial gain. He became known to local law enforcement and had to spend a night or two in the jails, but for the most part, he was successful at his craft. Night after night, he took to the graveyards, his streak only coming to a temporary halt when he was brought in by Scotland Yard for questioning in the prowler slayings. But they quickly deduced he hadn't the skills to perpetrate such crimes and let him go. He developed a reputation of being the best grave robber in the business, always seeming to find large scores every night. And when he wasn't just stealing the valuables from the deceased, he was also known to be quite dependable at procuring the proper bodily specimen for the medical students and university doctors who came calling. He did have a problem, however. He had a habit of spending his money almost as quickly as he dug it up, and he was running out of funds. He thought his last score would have set himself up comfortably for at least a few months. He had taken quite the stash of valuables off the corpse of Lady Jane Wetzel, a socialite who recently met her untimely demise, but it couldn't even last him a month. He wasn't worried, however, for he already had a lead on a promising grave. A young countess died unexpectedly, and she was scheduled to be buried this afternoon. Countess Philomena Postlethwaite. She belonged to one of the most wealthiest and powerful families in all of England. There must be a treasure trove buried alongside her, he thought. He went to the cemetery around 3 in the afternoon and waited. He wasn't there long when they ushered the Countess's corpse to what was to be her final resting place. He stood there and watched from a distance, behind an old mausoleum, as her parents watched and wept as they shoveled the dirt atop her coffin. It was rumored she was buried with her favorite ruby necklace her father gave her for her 18th birthday. Tonight, he would find out if those rumors were true. After she was buried, he went back home to prepare for his return later in the evening. He put together a bag of proper supplies he needed for his grave-robbing excursions, tools of the trade, if you will, to ensure the swiftest and smoothest of outcomes. A shovel to break through the earth, a pickaxe and crowbar to pry open the stingiest of coffins, and finally a hatchet and butcher knife to do away with any stiff limbs that prevent the taking of valuables. He had made that mistake early on in his career with old Mrs. Wilkinson. He dug her up, broke into her coffin with ease, but spent over an hour trying to pry loose valuable gold rings from her fingers that had frozen clutched from rigor mortis. Never again has he made that mistake. Now, whenever he sees a corpse's balled up fist, he cuts first. There's no time for questions. He waited for the grandfather clock to strike the midnight hour, and he was on his way. He moved through the foggy night, making sure not to be seen by the scant life that was out on the street at such an ungodly hour. He nestled himself inside the alleyways until he reached the Archway Cemetery, a resting ground for some of England's most wealthiest of families. If this were to go quickly, he might see if there was anything else worth breaking into, he thought. He waited for the night watchman, which was a joke, by the way, an 85-year-old man with a dog that matched, who should be in a home for the old, gumming his porridge instead of protecting this place. However, it is what it is. And as I was saying, he waited for the geriatric night watchman to pass, and he snuck in behind him. He then moved his way through the headstones, making his way to the young countess's freshly packed grave, and got to work. He shoveled his way through the freshly loose soil with ease, then cracked open the expensive casket. He stood and stared, mesmerized by the glow of the rumored ruby necklace that shined from the moon above. He hastily dropped the shovel and pickaxe to the ground, leaving them as they lay, and pulled out his knife. This has been so easy. If I hurry, I'll be able to break into a few more graves, he thought. He then proceeded to remove the ruby necklace from around her neck, then noticed an assortment of gold rings that adorned fingers on both hands, glistening in the moonlight. Both hands were clenched, so he took his trusty knife and began to sever her fingers. Once he removed two of the fingers with rings on them, he stopped and admired them, but only for an instant. Just then, a blood-curdling scream rang out from the coffin below his feet. The Countess! She was not dead. The removal of her fingers must have jolted her from her medical slumber. Reginald did not know this, however. He thought she was a ghost, or some vengeful demonic entity, angry for the thievery of her jewelry. She was pale and bloody, her eyes wide and ghostly white. She looked at Reginald and shrieked, "Who are you?" He dropped the bloody fingers in fright, still gripping his knife tightly in his hand. He stepped back a few paces as he stood up, moaning in pain. He stood there trembling in fear as she looked into his eyes, half masked in a silhouette from the moonlight, inside the ditch of the grave. He screamed out, "Please don't hurt me! Take back your necklace!" Her body then flinched, and when it did, he screamed and quickly turned, trying to crawl out of the grave. But in his fright and confusion, he didn't realize the wall of soil was right behind him, and when he turned hurriedly, he hit the wall of dirt hard, plunging the knife that was tightly gripped in his hand and positioned ever so into his inner groin. He stood there facing the mound of soil, stunned, quickly feeling the pain overtake his entire body as he felt the blood begin to pour out of his angry wound. The Countess, who was in a state of shock, managed to make her way out of the grave and walked off into the night, safely returning to her family. Reginald stood, still inside the grave, staring up at the moon, becoming lightheaded from the blood loss. Still in a state of terror, he reached up and grabbed hold of a root that was sticking out of the soil and tried to pull himself up out of the grave. His grip was weak, but he was trying. Just as it seemed he would climb his way out and reach the top, the root snapped, sending him falling atop his pickaxe that was laying point side up. As The once thought dead countess walked to safety in the cold, foggy night. The once lively grave robber lay dying, bleeding out inside her grave. The countess was never truly dead. She didn't return as a ghost or vengeful ghoul like Reginald thought. It was just a common occurrence during the time of a mistaken death and burial. The countess was sick and slipped into a temporary coma. Her family mistakenly thought she was dead and buried her quickly, and with autopsies not common during the time, there was no way of knowing that she was still with the living. Since this kind of thing had happened before, some families had resorted to planting bells atop the graveside with a string that was tied to the person who was believed to be dead below. And if they should wake up buried, they could ring the bell and be rescued. In this case, however, the Countess's family was assured by a renowned doctor that she was absolutely dead, and there was no need for a bell. Cemetery in the Bronx. My friend works as an Uber driver when he gets a mysterious call to pick a woman up at Woodlawn Cemetery around 2:30 a.m. at night. So my friend reluctantly goes to pick up this woman, even though he finds it really weird that she wants to be picked up by a cemetery at 2 a.m. My friend gets there, and sure enough, there's a woman by the front entrance of Woodlawn Cemetery. So he unlocks the door and the woman gets in the car. My friend asks the woman, where does she want to go? Because she gave a very general description in that app. She says she wants to go to West 168th Street. So he asks her for the building number, but all she gives him is a zip code, 10452. Thinking it was weird, but at the same time, okay, whatever, she paid me. He proceeded to take her to that destination. As my friend is driving this woman to her destination, he attempts to make small talk with the woman several times. He is usually quiet, but it being late and him being a little on edge, he decides to try to get her to talk in order to calm himself down a bit. But the woman remains silent the entire ride. As they get closer to the destination, he is becoming relieved to be getting to that point where he can let the woman out of his car so he can get the hell home himself. However, as he's on the Bronx River Parkway going through exit 10, he begins to feel a tap on his shoulder. The woman finally speaks and says, "Here's your tip." He sees a $100 bill and two 20s in the woman's hand, but he declines to take it because it's a rather large sum of money, and he finds it to be too much for what was already the strangest ride he's ever had. So he declines by saying, "I appreciate it, but that's okay. You paid me on the app." The woman proceeds to say it again. "Here's your tip." My friend declines again, still keeping his eye on the road, saying, "Ma'am, it's really okay. I can't accept that." But rather than recoiling her hand, the woman says a third time, "Here's your tip." Only her voice was completely different this time. It sounded raspy, like she had something in her throat. So my friend turns around to tell her, "Look, I appreciate it, but I can't take the money." But just as he's about to say something to her, he notices that the woman who got into his car no longer looks like the woman who got into his car. Her skin is pale white and wrinkled. Her eyes are void of all pigmentation, and her clothes are dirty and tattered, as if she crawled her way out of a grave. She looks like a corpse, Startled, my friend lost control of the wheel and he crashed the car into a telephone pole, blacking out. When he came to, he was in Our Lady of Mercy Hospital in a bed. He asked the attending nurse, who was in the room at the time, what happened, and the nurse proceeds to tell him that he was in a car accident. He then asks about the woman in the back seat. The nurse, thinking he was delirious, said there was no woman in the car. He was the only one that was brought in from the accident, and that what he saw was probably just his mind playing tricks on him. It was around 2:45 a.m. when he crashed the vehicle. She then mentions, though, that this isn't the first time in her tenure as a nurse that people were brought in after crashing their car in that specific area. At first, these crashes were thought to be due to the poor shape of the bridge, so the city had work done on the bridge. But car crashes kept occurring over the years, no matter how many signs were put on that particular bridge or how much work was put into it. Eventually work ceased, and residents around that area stopped crossing that bridge after a certain time, believing it to be cursed. So, my friend proceeds to ask about the other drivers, only to find out he is the only survivor of these crashes. Everyone else was in far worse condition than he was when he was brought in and never stabilized. They also all happened to be men. My friend was pondering why that is, because it is odd when the nurse turns and says to him while fixing his room, "You know, had it been a second or two sooner, you wouldn't have been so lucky." It's at this moment that it dawns on him that had he turned around to take the tip when the passenger first offered it, he'd be dead. The nurse, continuing the convo, proceeds to tell him about the first crash prior to the string of occurrences that happened on the bridge, as she was an attending nurse for that hospital when they first started occurring. One day, a man was brought in critical condition, but conscious, followed by a detective at the scene of the accident. She asked the detective what happened, and from her recollection, the story goes that a woman and her husband were supposedly having a dispute over money. The man had a history of alcohol abuse, which strained their marriage, and his wife barely made enough to make ends meet, and wanted whatever she made to pay for his habit as well. Pissed off at him, she decided to sit in the back of the car that night of the crash, and her husband drove while under the influence. During the argument, he got pissed off and turned around to yell at her because she refused to give him the money she made in tips at her job that night. He inevitably lost control of the wheel as he turned to yell at her. She died in the crash, and he lived. When they conducted the autopsy on her, they found in her clothes a wallet with $140 in it, all she had to her name. My friend, shocked, stopped the nurse and told her that was the same amount that the woman offered me before I crashed the car. So naturally, thinking my friend was still out of it, she tells him to go back to bed. Just get some rest. As my friend tries to go back to sleep, while the nurse continues preparing the room, he's watching her clean up around the area when she walks up to the vase near the door. She notices something under the vase. She picks the vase up, and at that moment, she lets out this blood-curdling scream, and she runs out of his room. At this point, my friend is startled. He gets up and unplugs the monitor that shows his vitals, walks to where she dropped the vase, walks around the broken glass, and picks up what was under that vase. It was a card. with $140 inside. Written on that card was a simple sentence. It said, "Here's your tip." Took a bet to spend the night at the cemetery. Seriously freaked right now. Should I leave? Leaving is barely an option. I'd rather not discuss the specifics, but it's very important to me that I win this bet, which means getting through this night. Right now it's 1:14 a.m. Eastern Time in a part of Connecticut that I'm very unfamiliar with. I'm in Fairfield. It's the county over from me. I'm pretty sure the town is Easton. Could be wrong, but East is definitely in the name. Either way, it's a cemetery that's especially scary, according to my friend who made the bet. That's why we drove 40 minutes to get here. I explained I would do it. No problem. I'm not scared. I don't believe in ghosts. Yada, yada, yada. Now, I'm freaking out. I got dropped off at 11 p.m. I have to stay until 6 a.m. I have to take iPhone video and Snapchat updates every 90 minutes as proof. Besides my phone, I brought a sleeping bag, plenty of water, a blunt, 6-pack of Smirnoff Ice, and a bag of almonds. Not sure if that matters. My phone is what I am typing all this on. Thank God I can get service here. Things were fine the first couple of hours. I was just drinking and texting some friends. Got here with a fully charged phone. About half an hour ago, I felt a breeze pick up. I know it has nothing to do with it, but I instantly felt creeped out. I began scanning the area but saw nothing. I was feeling anxious and thought smoking the blunt would help. It didn't at all. I was a little buzzed, that's for sure, but I'm so certain that I saw something. Shit, I really should explain the layout of where I am first. The whole graveyard is just a grid layout. When you enter, half of the graveyard is to your left, the other half to the right. The left side is at a slight incline. Straight ahead is a large Holy Mary statue, which seems to be the center of the entire property. When I walked in, I went straight, past the statue, to the end of the far side. There was a bench, and that's where I sat, spending my first few hours. Sitting on this bench, I was facing towards the statue. Feeling even more paranoid after smoking, I went back to my phone in an attempt to distract myself. Every couple of seconds, I looked up and scanned the area. When I first saw something, I didn't know what else to call it, but something. My heart skipped a beat as I took a quick double take. Easily the most panicked reaction I've ever witnessed take hold of my body. Before I knew it, it was gone. It was a figure, some sort of human figure. I have no idea, male or female. It was in the distance a bit. I may be freaking out, I don't know, but I'm pretty fucking sure I saw something. Like I know people freak out, so I'm trying to convince myself I'm one of them, but it really, really looked like it was there. Panicked as hell, I grabbed my things without even thinking and headed towards the side of the graveyard, not at the incline. I was beginning to settle down, barely, before I looked back towards where I was. My eyes drifted towards the statue, and now I see 2 red eyes coming from a bush about 50 yards away. I'm 100% positive I see red eyes, or at least lights, in those bushes. I'm staring at them now. Every so often they blink, or hopefully just flash if there's some sort of light. Right now I'm debating going over to see if it's some sort of light. I know it has to be, but that figure I saw is really freaking me out. Whoever I saw could be hiding in the bushes, but they wouldn't have red eyes, which makes me think it's something crazy like a ghost. I have no idea what to do, deciding between running and getting picked up. Friend has their ringer on if I need to forfeit the bet, or check out the red lights. I wish I could show you why they look like eyes. I know my phone won't pick up a good picture, and I'm pretty scared to use the flashlight now. Any suggestions? If nothing else, any company, maybe? I'm literally shaking right now. I went back to the bench to take pictures of how creepy it was. Ended up with creepiest picture I ever saw. I'm going to post it in a minute. Currently hyperventilating. After that picture, I went closer to get a better shot and freaked out when I saw the result. I took 2 more quick ones before sprinting away. Please, someone, give me a rational excuse for this. I'm freaking out right now. For those saying to call my friend to see if it's him messing with me, I did give him a call. It's not him. I checked the Find My Friends app, and he's at his house right now. I told him I might be bailing. The part that makes this so scary for me is I'm so far away from civilization. We drove about half a mile down a rural road with no house to get to the entrance. The cemetery is basically abandoned. Graves are from 100 years ago or so. It's 3:12 a.m. The eyes have reappeared in a bush about 10 feet away from me. I know they're eyes. I'm going to walk towards it and hope it's an animal that runs away. On the off chance that people are still following this, I made it through the night safely, all the way to 6 a.m., where my friend picked me up as promised. As many of you guessed, my phone did die on me. It was an incredibly freaky night that I will have to expand on later. I live in an apartment building underneath the cemetery. Rent is complicated. Don't ask me how it works. I push back Mr. Morgan's gravestone and descend the long set of stairs to the hallway where my apartment is. I'm at the very end, which would increase the sense of claustrophobia for most people. But that's not the part that really bothers me. Maybe it would be if there weren't so many other things to be horrified by. The great thing about this apartment is that I'm allowed to stay here for free. That is, I don't have to pay money at all. But I do have to do labor. You see, American culture is more fucked up than you give it credit for. I have to film things. Oh God, it's so disgusting watching 2 corpses go at it like horny rabbits. But I have to make sure the camera is rolling and streaming live to Brian Tolbert's personal website. You wouldn't believe the market for this kind of thing, Brian tells me, and I didn't at first. Ever since I've been at the helm, though, he tells me traffic at the site has been up. You're an excellent cameraman. Keep up the good work, and you might actually get some funding on the side. Except staying here is beginning to take its toll on me, for obvious reasons. However, I don't have any other options at the moment. So between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m., I have to watch 2 zombies screw each other's non-brains out. Listen to the sickening sucking sounds. Make sure the camera is at the right angle. What happened after last night's session scarred me for life. I had just wrapped up another vomit-inducing shoot when I heard scratching coming from the wall, separating the room the camera was in from the room I was charged with spying on. Strange, I thought. That never usually happened before. I peered through the camera lens to find a zombie's rotting face looking back at me. My heart thudded in my chest. I grabbed it with one hand in an effort to slow it down. As soon as I managed to calm down just a little, I looked through the lens again. It appeared the two corpses were trying to shuffle out of the doorway leading into the hallway, which could lead to my room. That wasn't supposed to happen. Mr. Talbot said he trained the zombies to perform and never leave the bed he provided for them. They'd keep doing this until enough of them rotted away that they died all over again. But here they were, trying to shamble out of the room. I hurried out of mine just in time to see the two zombies just standing there, eyes empty, backs hunched over. They seemed as confused as ever. One of them sort of lurched forward, which caused me to quickly grab the doorknob and slam the door shut. Something bumped up against the door. Then I heard a thud on the floor. Dumb zombies. Just as I was turning away, I saw Nina, the only other living human aside from Mr. Talbot and myself. She gave me a hesitant smile, and I waved awkwardly. I wasn't naive. I knew what services Talbot made Nina perform so that she could live here without having to pay rent. I shuddered at the thought. I had a revelation that nothing in this grotto of sin was free. Nina gave me a final glance before she went inside her apartment. I truly felt bad for her and wished there was something I could do to help. I shook my head, trying to clear it after what I had just seen. Those walking corpses truly possessed minds of their own, despite what Talbot said. I walked to the other end of the hall to his apartment door, hesitated before knocking. It wasn't part of my job description per se, but I figured I'd inform him of the situation. Mr. Talbot answered the door in his bathrobe, hazy-eyed and looking as if he had been doing drugs. He swayed a bit, seemed like he might topple over. He clutched something in his hand. "Is that a doll in your hand, Mr. Talbot?" I asked, trying to keep the humor out of my voice. The thing was covered in a red fabric, with two gray X's instead of eyes. "Don't judge me, Miles. You're just a glorified camera monkey." He slurred, swayed a bit more. "All you do is film that decaying flesh." "That's exactly why I'm here. I'm trying to be professional. Anyway, you said the zombies would just remain on the bed, right? Well, they almost escaped, and would've if I hadn't shut the door." "What? What, do you want a Good Samaritan award or something? Get lost. It's just this damn doll. Got it off eBay. Controls the dead," Mr. Talbot replied, then slammed the door in my face. I knew what I needed to do. I needed that damn doll. My plan was to wait for Mr. Talbot to fall asleep and then sneak into his apartment and snatch it. I figured I'd destroy it or toss it into the big pond near the border of the cemetery. Then my bizarre life could get back to normal. I tried to pass the time inside my own room by putting on my large pair of headphones and reading one of the few books I owned. Once the clock read 10 p.m., I got up and made my way to Mr. Talbot's door. He wasn't that old, but between the drinking and being an unhealthy bastard, he typically fell asleep early. I could sometimes make out his snoring all the way down the hall. I did my best to quietly pick the lock. Only took me a couple of tries. When I opened the door, I got the shock of my life. Nina sat on the small red chair opposite the bed, watching the corpses eat Mr. Talbot's body with a mixture of satisfaction and horror. One of the corpses stood up and turned its head towards mine. My throat went dry as I saw it just glare into me, but Nina only squeezed the doll and the thing went back to its task. I just watched them eat Mr. Talbot without saying a word. Now Nina controls this little apartment complex beneath the cemetery. I better do what she says, or I'll end up like the bloated drunkard who had been eaten to death by his undead porn actors. Undead and unpaid, I thought. Nina said she was interested in starting a business down here. Something focusing on showmanship, captivating an audience, although it would be different than Mr. Talbot's vision. Maybe I'll convince perverts to meet me in the cemetery, lure them down here, and let the dead rip them to shreds. I realized then I couldn't argue with her logic. It was a sound business plan. Nina looked at me as if to say, "You better stay out of my way." I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.